This person is indigenous. So is this one, and this one, and this one. The National Geographic's Encyclopedia says that indigenous refers to people or objects that are native to a certain region or environment, whether they grow there, live there, are produced there, or occur there naturally. When it comes to flora and fauna, they're considered indigenous to an ecosystem when they haven't been introduced by human intervention or manipulated by human cultivation. Over millions of years, these living things have become well suited to their habitats, carefully adapted to the region's soil, climate, and food web. However, when it comes to people, there can be some confusion about what it means to be indigenous, especially when questions of land rights, autonomy, and reparations enter the equation. Most people understand that Native American nations and Aboriginal Australians are indigenous, but some might then ask, well, if indigenous means originating from a place, then aren't all Homo sapiens indigenous to Africa? Why should one group's claim of indigeneity take precedence over any other? Others may ask the question, if a group occupies a region for several generations, does that then make them indigenous? Are white Americans indigenous if their families have been there since the founding of the United States? Are French people indigenous to France? And if so, does that somehow justify their xenophobia towards refugees and some weird reactionary corruption of decolonial rhetoric? If they're white nationalists like Stone Toss, they might even try to implicitly argue that settler colonialism was no different than any other conflict between indigenous people. So what does it even matter? When generations of marginalized groups have been struggling to retain their social, cultural, economic, and political sovereignty and achieve justice, reparations, and liberation after centuries of oppression and attempted annihilation, we need to stand in informed solidarity. Thus, it is vital for us to understand what it means to be indigenous. For the sake of this video, I explored a discontinuous array of texts, videos, and discussions to eventually distill my understanding of how we can define indigeneity. This isn't the final word on the matter, just one perspective, of course, and it should be noted that I've drawn primarily from the work of North American indigenous authors, namely Taiaiake Alfred, Jeff Corntassel, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, so do keep that in mind as we proceed. I believe that there are two principal, highly overlapping ways that indigeneity can be defined or interpreted. One, as an identity formed as part of a colonial relationship, and two, as an identity rooted in a relationship to place. I believe that each definition is incomplete without the other, but by understanding and synthesizing each notion of indigenousness, we can better ground our approach to decolonization and social revolution. Let's start with the first interpretation of indigeneity. According to Taiaiake Alfred and Jeff Corntassel, indigenousness is an identity constructed, shaped, and lived in the politicized context of contemporary colonialism. It is an existence oppositional to colonial societies and states, and a consciousness of struggle against such forces of colonization. No two indigenous groups are exactly alike, of course. There is significant diversity in their cultures, contexts, and relationships with colonial forces, but they do share that struggle to survive as distinct peoples in an environment largely hostile to their existence. Efforts to marginalize and eradicate indigenous peoples may not always be as overt as they once were. But the historic and ongoing dispossession of indigenous peoples, the erasure of indigenous histories, geographies, and languages, and the current situation of deprivation persist nonetheless. Even so-called reconciliation efforts are tainted by the reality that indigenous peoples remain, as in earlier colonial eras, fundamentally occupied and disempowered peoples, stripped of autonomy in their own homelands, and pressured into surrender and cooperation with an inherently unjust colonial order just to ensure basic physical survival. By this understanding of indigeneity, it can be said that without a colonizer, without systems in place and actions being taken to marginalize, disempower, and destroy their societies in favor of a colonial replacement, there is no indigenous. Without colonialism, there would be no status of indigenous to be imposed upon the groups of people whose very existence and claim to the land is an obstacle to that colonial endeavour. The UN Working Group on Indigenous Issues drew partially from this understanding when attempting to define indigenous peoples in 1986. Indigenous communities, peoples, and nations are those which, having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that developed on their territories, consider themselves distinct from other sectors of the societies now prevailing on those territories, or parts of them. They form at present non-dominant sectors of society and are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their ancestral territories and their ethnic identity as the basis of their continued existence as peoples in accordance with their own cultural patterns, social institutions, and legal systems. By this definition, Amerindians in the Caribbean, Aboriginal Australians, Adivasis in India, Native North and South Americans, Siberians, Ainu, Kurds, Assyrians, Yazidi, Palestinians, Amazigh, Sapmi, Basques, Hawaiians, Maori, San, Mbuti, Papuans, Chams, and many more are all indigenous peoples. There are layers of nuance yet to be highlighted. The colonial situation is not a simple binary of indigenous and colonist. For example, in the Americas, Africans who were indigenous to their own homelands were displaced and enslaved under the colonial regime. They may not be indigenous to the Americas, but they weren't driving settler colonial society either. In fact, some were enslaved by indigenous people as well. At the same time, some members of the African diaspora would join existing indigenous societies and later create their own, such as the Garifuna of St. Vincent, Honduras, and Belize. Meanwhile, in modern-day Africa, though all African ethnic groups can technically be considered indigenous to the continent, the concept of specific indigenous peoples within Africa refers to those groups whose traditional practices and land claims have been placed outside of the dominant state systems and exist in conflict with the objectives and policies implemented by governments, companies, and surrounding dominant societies. Such a definition can similarly be applied in modern-day Asia, where governments like Indonesia, India, China, Vietnam, and Bangladesh have infamously refused to recognize the existence of indigenous peoples within their territories. These countries, like most countries in the world, did not ratify the International Labour Organization Convention 169 in 1989, known as the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention concerning the rights of indigenous peoples. The UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, passed in 2007, would, however, be voted on approvingly by most of the world, including the same countries that still haven't recognized the indigenous peoples within their borders. All 4 of the countries that rejected the resolution, Canada, America, Australia, and New Zealand, would later change their vote in favor of the declaration, of course with their own tacked-on interpretations and emphasis on the declaration's legally non-binding nature, as is to be expected from settler colonial societies. There are approximately 250 to 600 million indigenous peoples around the world today, each facing the reality of having their lands, cultures, and forms of organization attacked, co-opted, commodified, and reconstructed by various states. Regardless of their legal recognition, indigenous peoples themselves have long understood that their endurance as a people will continue to depend on their connection to land, culture, and community. Which brings us to the second interpretation of indigeneity, closely related to the first, as an identity rooted in a relationship to place, whether that be physical as with land, social as with community, or cultural as with culture. An indigenous relationship to the land must be reciprocal, with give and take, based on a view of the land and water as a gift that must be cared for over generations. According to Haudenosaunee mythology, as retold by Robin Wall Kimmerer in Braiding, Sweetgrass, the mother goddess Sky Woman came to the land as an immigrant from the heavens, but became indigenous by listening to the land, learning from other species to understand how to live on it, giving as she received, and caring for the earth and its keepers for the sake of those who would inherit it when she passed on. The land is identity. It is ancestral connection, it is pharmacy, it is library, and it is home. the source of all that sustains, and the sacred ground upon which those would observe their responsibility to the world. By this understanding, it can be said that indigeneity is born out of a land connection established through observation and relationship. Indigenous peoples have historically been mobile, either by choice or by force. But regardless of where they might find themselves, homeland or not, even if there were other indigenous peoples in their new environments, as long as they observed the processes and ceremonies of generational relationship building based on mutual respect, understanding, and love for the land in common, they remained indigenous. So then, the question might arise, why aren't settlers indigenous to place if their families have lived on the land for generations? The answer lies in relationship. Settler society is based on an extractivist capitalist relationship with the land, focused on exploiting the land and its natural resources. Without a relationship with the land that extends reverence to a deeper understanding of its complex interdependence, settler society can never become indigenous to place. Of course, it goes without saying that not every indigenous group or indigenous practice is perfectly sustainable. Some have been rather destructive and even speciocidal. But if we are to work with this particular definition to conceive of being indigenous as something based on cultivating a long-term relationship to place, then indigeneity must be contingent on maintaining the health and longevity of that relationship. Without community, there can be no indigeneity. Much like the trees in a forest are interconnected by subterranean networks of mycorrhizae which enable them to share resources and survive as a whole, in order to be indigenous to place, community must exist to sustain that web of reciprocity of the land so that all may flourish. Indigeneity to place extends to culture as well, which is deeply tied to the land it develops on. Cultural ceremonies, according to Kimmerer, focus attention so that attention becomes intention. If you stand together and profess a thing before your community, it holds you accountable. Ceremonies transcend the boundaries of the individual and resonate beyond the human realm. Such practices should be reciprocal, as ceremonies create communities and communities create ceremonies, as well as organic, not appropriating existing cultural celebrations or tending toward the commercial. Our social fabric has become withered and fragmented by the pace of modern life, leaving little room for ceremonies outside of religion or rites of personal transition such as birthdays, weddings, and funerals. But ceremonies and the shared emotions they generate are part of what builds community. When we gather for graduations, for example, a sense of pride, relief, nostalgia, and excitement builds in the social atmosphere, hopefully fueling the confidence and strength of those who are going on to pursue their passions. But Kimmerer wants us to imagine standing by a river flooded with those same feelings as the salmon march into the auditorium of the estuary. Being indigenous to place means cultivating cultural ceremonies that honor the land and all the cycles and seasons of life within it. Now that we have a clearer understanding of these two distinct yet related understandings of indigeneity, both as an identity formed as part of a colonial relationship and as an identity rooted in a relationship to place, I believe that we should explore how this understanding can be applied to decolonization and social revolution. Decolonization is the process of unsetting colonial power structures, whether that be through overturning acts of enclosure by building new commons, overturning acts of possession by reclaiming our spaces and identities, or overturning acts of administration through social revolution. Social revolution is a complete transformation of our society, economy, culture, philosophy, technology, relationships, and politics. An ongoing and heterogeneous change in people's powers, drives, and consciousness through practical education, as well as a progressive breakdown and transformation of existing systems and institutions, punctuated by major ruptures and advances, all with the aim of self-liberation. It takes confrontation with the powers that be, non-cooperation with the established order of things, and prefiguration of new social relations, institutions, infrastructure, and practices in the here and now. If we maintain the interpretation of indigeneity as based on one's position in a colonial relationship, then the decolonization process will entail the abolition of that relationship as the premise of identity, and therefore the abolition of indigeneity as a status. Colonial legacies have effectively left indigenous communities legally and politically compartmentalized, and culturally, socially, and spiritually weakened within the narrow parameters of the state, where they end up diverting the crucial energy necessary to confront state power and develop the process of decolonization toward mimicking the practices of the dominant non-indigenous legal political institutions through, for example, land claims and self-government processes. What the decolonization movement needs, according to Maya Yucateco poet Feliciano Sanchez Chan, are zones of refuge, places where indigenous knowledge can be guarded, exercised, and sustained. In Mesoamerica, these zones of refuge represent safe spaces where the diverse cultural expressions of the region can persist in spite of state efforts to create a homogenized Mexican national identity. The concept of zones of refuge is consistent with the traditional objectives of cultural preservation and autonomy and with the social revolutionary aims of prefiguration, which seeks to sow the seeds of future relationships, institutions, and practices in the here and now. Through the expansion of zones of refuge and other institutions of resistance and autonomy, we can realize decolonization in reality. But again, this idea of indigeneity via colonization is just one understanding of the term. We need to explore another approach to decolonization, one that recognizes the power and potential of indigenous relationships with the land. Globally, the UN recognizes that indigenous peoples protect 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, and scientists have shown that indigenous management practices in Brazil, Canada, and Australia provides the same level of ecosystem support and protection as any imposed protected area, which makes it abundantly clear that the colonial approach of conservation via dispossession removes the very people who take care of our most important ecosystems. Over the course of Braiding Sweetgrass, Kimmerer highlights the reciprocal relationship with the earth that many indigenous groups, including her Potawatomi culture, have cultivated over generations. The principle of the gift economy is an essential aspect of this relationship, which forms the basis of indigeneity to place. The gift economy is a system of exchange where resources and services are shared without expectation of remuneration or quid pro quo. The gift economy extends not just to people, but also to our non-human kin, caring and being cared for in turn. If we want to restore that relationship, we can start by planting a garden. A garden can be a haven for native flora, a resting place for native fauna, a feast for endangered pollinators, a sustainer of the local water table, and a hub of thriving soil. Not only does it benefit both our health and the health of the planet, but it is also a nursery for nurturing a connection that extends beyond that small patch of dirt. I don't believe that merely building a connection with the land can make someone indigenous, but not being indigenous doesn't exclude us from aiding in the renewal of the world. Kimmerer uses the example of the broadleaf plantain, also known as the white man's footprint. Despite not being indigenous to the Americas, it has become an honored member of the plant community because it lives as a good neighbor instead of as a destructive invader. While other invasive species poison the soil or overrun the land, the white man's footprint took on a strategy of helpful coexistence, even sharing some of its healing properties with those who ask of it. It is not indigenous, but it has become naturalized. Being naturalized to place means to live as if this is the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in this ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters. To take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all our relatives depend on it. Because they do. Decolonization will require us to uproot invasive, irreverent, and destructive individualist capitalist settler societies in order to rebuild in a way that treats the land like the home that we share and are responsible for. It will require us to receive and honor the knowledge in the land, to care for its keepers, and to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. It is crucial that we elevate Indigenous voices, knowledges, and pedagogical approaches in the pursuit of this aim. So in the spirit of practicing what I preach, here are the decolonial mantras that Taiaiake, Alfred, and Corntassel recommended for the regeneration of Indigenous communities in being Indigenous. Land is life. Reconnecting with one's land and heritage is necessary to comprehend the teachings and values of the ancestors and to draw strength and sustenance that is independent of colonial power. Language is power. There must be an effort to recover ways of knowing and relating from outside the framework of colonialism through the cultivation of Indigenous languages. Freedom is the other side of fear. The fears imposed by colonial powers to manipulate Indigenous peoples into complacency must be confronted head-on through direct action if freedom is to be achieved. Decolonize your diet. Developing the self-sufficient capacity to provide one's own food, clothing, shelter, and medicines can aid in the reconstruction of both individual and social health. Lastly, change happens one warrior at a time. Mentoring relationships can help foster the meaningful human development and community solidarity necessary for effective decolonial and regenerative movement building. All power to all the people. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with fellow peoples. Thanks once again, of course, to the family, including our newest members, Rick Bow, Tristan Armitage, Micah Smith, Wilsonian Garviite, Borut Blesej, Randall Rice, Zlatan, and Nicholas Gayet. Join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/SaintTrue. Check out all my other videos for a range of radical topics. Follow me on Twitter @_SaintTrue. Thanks again. Peace.